Please join me in welcoming tonight's moderator, Janet Maslin, and our very special guest, Colin Firth.
It turns out that if anybody in this audience would like to buy a 2010 Colin Firth calendar, and I have a feeling that we have people who would, if you look on Amazon, they begin at $125. And they're just, I think, just 12 headshots of you.
Wow.
How would you, what's that, what's that about?
That means I'm worth $10 per month. I don't know. It's nothing to do with me. I'm missing a financial opportunity.
Did you know? Did you know about this?
No.
Okay.
No, but thank you for the information. I'll be contacting my people.
Some of this owes something to the fact that you have lately been going around absolutely beautifully turned out, and as you are in The Single Man. Are you now in a Tom Ford wardrobe? Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to tell you it was Sears. I'd be looking a gift horse in the mouth, you know, if I questioned an offer to be dressed by somebody as accomplished as Tom Ford. Really, you know, I have a lot of engagements in which, you know, I have to be seen, and actors are notoriously bad dressers. I mean, certainly English actors are. We really don't know what to do when we don't have a script and a character and a dresser and a costume designer, and you know, most of the time we don't, and so we're not quite sure who to appear as when we walk out of our front door.
A film that you made not long ago called Easy Virtue, based on a Noel Coward play, and in it you appear kind of the way most of us remember you looking until you met Tom Ford. So how did you get from there to here?
Noel Coward wrote that play in, I think, 1924. It was one of his very early plays. And the first person to make, and last, I think, person to make a film of it was Hitchcock, which most people wouldn't be aware of. It was in 1929, it was a silent film, which seems somewhat inconsistent, you know, when you think of Noel Coward. Yes, right. You know, right. You take one of the greatest, you know, purveyors of the bon mot and make it silent. But he, no, that character's debonair and dapper and well put together, and I just came in and I thought, no. I just thought it would be much more interesting to just unthread him and create someone who had gone feral in his own family.
So did you really did put together?
I did. No, I walked in. I went into costume fittings and I looked at the bow ties and the sleek lines and all the rest of it, and said, no, I think no ties. I want scarves, and I think he should be a chain smoker, and I think we should have stubble. And it was one of those things you look at a story with the benefit of historical hindsight, and it was within 10 years of the First World War, which had basically shattered a generation. And here was a family with great cultural pretenses, and they were doing what the English have been doing for at least 100 years, which is pretending they are an imperial force, which they have long not been. And I think this film encapsulated that. I don't think Noel Coward was conscious of that when he was writing it. I think he was too close to it all in a way. He wrote, you know, 5 years after the war. But I just felt, you know, this is a man who must have been through the war, and I think he's been destroyed by it, and he's given up on the pretense.
The character is called Mr. Whitaker.
Yes.
And when one looks at the characters you've played, there are kind of two categories that jump out. There are the Misters. There's Mr. Whitaker. There's another Mr. who we'll get to later. And then there's this list. King George VI, Lord Henry Wotton, Aurelius, Johannes Vermeer, Dr. Wilhelm Stuckert, William Shakespeare, and Lord Wessex. Do you see any kind of typecasting in either one of those things?
No, well, no, I could probably distinguish between most of those.
I'm just saying that until now, there were certain kind of roles that you would often be.
Yeah, but I mean, King George VI and Johannes Vermeer don't have anything in common, I don't think.
Okay.
I mean, they might.
They have more in common with each other than either of them has with Tom Ford, I would say.
Possibly. No, although I think Johannes Vermeer and Tom Ford are both have people who have great artistic sensibilities. I don't think King George VI had any at all. Aurelius was at least intended to be a man who was full of testosterone and an inclination to violence. That certainly wasn't George VI, and certainly not me. And I dare say he didn't come across like that in my hands. But no, I don't think so. I think they probably reside in the imagination as figures who you might find in a book.
I'm just saying that you've only once played a guy named Vince.
And you know, I only narrowly got to play him as Vince, really, because he was written in that novel as an Italian-American. This is Where the Truth Lies, yeah. Vince Collins was an Italian-American. And I would have been very happy with the opportunity to play him as an Italian-American, but I was very quickly told by the director, and he was quite right in this, really, that it would be much more useful to bring some of my baggage to the role. And it was the first time I realized that my baggage was inevitable, and that I was going to have to start lugging it around and get used to it and import it into roles which I would much rather have started fresh with. But actually, it was, I don't know, maybe it was just a sign of recognition of inevitability in the world, that one's work isn't just dependent on a fresh start or a clean slate, that actually the history that you bring to things and the things that you're associated with may actually also be instruments that you can use when you're expressing yourself. I mean, the instinct for an actor is to say, you know, I do not acknowledge anything outside the world of this character. The challenge of playing a character conflicts with that. And but on this occasion, I realized, because I don't know, most people haven't seen Where the Truth Lies. I think the viewing figures amounted to about 3, and there are more of you than that in this room. So. But the character was one of a performing duo of the 1950s, which were distantly, very, very distantly based on a kind of Rat Pack, Lewis and Martin kind of duo. And we took it a long way from that. And the Vince Collins character is someone who, on stage, seems like a civilized English gentleman. It's as if Noel Coward had come to Hollywood, or perhaps something of Peter Lawford. But backstage, we see the weaknesses and the corruption and the venality of the character, and actually we see that I'm psychotic and violent, and I'm a drug addict and a pervert.
We had a clip of you attacking somebody violently.
You decided against it.
Yes.
So there we are. But Atom Egoyan, it was a brilliant director who directed it, said that is far more shocking and interesting if you are an English gentleman than if you are, Tony Soprano. So, the English gentleman who says, just excuse me for a moment, I just have to go and beat the crap out of somebody, has more impact. And I think that he was right.
Is that same baggage what led you to Tom Ford and to A Single Man?
Probably. I didn't.
Did you know him before he approached you?
Not really. No, we'd met a couple of times. I mean, I don't dwell on my baggage every time I get offered a role, but no, this time I didn't look at it as an opportunity to reinvent myself or to. I mean, I don't really think of things that way. I'm not thinking strategically when I work.
But what made him think of you? Do you think?
You'd have to ask him. He. All I can say is the fact he thought of me was irresistible to my vanity. There's nothing like it. I mean, if you want to get, I mean, I don't know how many of you, if anybody here makes films, but just flattery gets you absolutely everywhere. And to open my computer in the morning and see Tom Ford, I didn't give him my email address. I still haven't found out who did. He explained himself in a very elegant and eloquent email. The reason he'd been looking at me in a very piercing and enigmatic way on our brief encounters over the previous 12 months was the following. And he explained the project that he had in mind. And I have to say that the meetings we'd had, where they were at parties, one was at a party and one was at a premiere. And you know, the Tom Ford gaze, I mean, you've seen it in, you know, behind the fragrance counter. But this time it was very specific and really quite intense. And I really didn't mistake it for flirtation or, you know, or a come on or anything. It was sort of inscrutable and difficult to interpret. And this happened twice. And this email explained everything. And he said, I've been looking at you, and it's because I have this in mind. And I am riveted when I see improbable combinations. When I see you know, a sense of the unexpected. And the fact that Tom wanted to make a film at all was interesting to me. By the time I got to the end of the email, I sensed very quickly that this was not a vanity project. That his choice of material suggested to me that this was something very personal to him. And
did you know the material before?
No. No, I thought I knew something about Christopher Isherwood, but I had no idea that he'd even gone to LA, quite frankly. I just knew about the Weimar stuff, you know, the German period, which anyone who has a sort of a cursory knowledge of Isherwood knows. And, but no, I didn't know anything about this. And the idea that his choice of material was a lonely gay college professor in 1962 who's decided to kill himself. It didn't sound like an opportunity to show off his spring collection. You know?
Although it kind of was.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think in some ways people have taken shots at him for being who he is and having these extraordinary visual sensibilities. And I think if you didn't know anything about, I mean, we're talking about baggage. If you didn't know anything about Tom's history, and you didn't know that he was a fashion designer, and you didn't know that he'd been a photographer, you would probably look at this first-time filmmaker and say, what beautiful cinematic sensibilities he has. And instead, I think there's been a great deal of focus on the clothes, and I mean, they're great. But I think they're wonderful at the service of the narrative, and I'm speaking very subjectively here. As an actor, these things help me enormously.
How did you know that he was going to know what he was doing?
I didn't know that he would know. You can't know. You never get, you know, we would love, if we got a guarantee every time that the person you take a risk on will deliver, then every film would be a masterpiece. You know, he was taking a risk as well. I know I've done a lot of films, but this is something I've never been asked to do. I mean, I wish I was on a regular basis in a way, but he was trusting an entire story to me. He was entrusting the life of this man. It unfolds in one day, but it really is an entire life lived out in a day, with every emotion you can conceive of, albeit within a fairly contained kind of carapace that this man deliberately creates for himself. But he wakes up in the morning in a state of despair, and then you see him go through, in the course of about 15 hours, through rage, frivolity, hilarity, lust, regret, irony, you know, adoration, and sentimentality. And it, you know, Tom, to pick an actor and say, here, this is on your shoulders, and this is my story as well. Because Tom, it was his. He took it much further from, he took it a long way from Christopher Isherwood, really. Christopher Isherwood did not have the concept of the suicide. Tom introduced that. Again, I'm not going to speak for him, but I think that's something that's personal to him. And I think there's something very, very stirring, very moving when somebody trusts you utterly with something very, very personal. It's a challenge to reciprocate the trust. And so I'm not saying that's why I did it, because that happened, but this was quite a compelling combination of things. You know, Tom Ford decides to make a film. He's got a reputation for a certain kind of brilliance. Well, not a certain kind of, brilliance on many fronts. He not only is a brilliant designer and has a vision, he clearly has enough capacity to communicate that vision, to get things done on a very large scale. He also can run a fashion house, and not just any fashion house, a major one. He's credited with turning the entire fashion industry around. He's also an utterly brilliant photographer. He has a considerable intellect, which is apparent after 1 minute of talking to him. And he has the kind of quality that you engage with. And all those things, you know, those are a lot of boxes that a lot of directors do not tick, quite frankly, however many films they've made. And this piece of writing was unique.
Could you tell at all ahead of time what the rhythm of this film was going to be? Because there's a lot of staring, there's a lot of slow walking, there's a lot of very measured behavior, and you're used to doing some things at a much more, you know, different kind of energy level.
No, well, I couldn't tell. As I said, you can't definitively tell anything, but I had a sense that it would have to be something like that. This did not read as something that was plotty. And I mean, you watch the film, there's no way it's plotty. I mean, that was something to be wary of in a way, but I also don't really like plotty things. I mean, I did a film called Geneva, which in some ways this resonated with, which is also about grief, and also has very little that you could call plot in the conventional sense. It's a kind of tone poem. And I love that kind of cinema, and I love cinema that makes use of the human face, and I love cinema that makes use of things other than 3 acts and, you know, a kind of conventional MacGuffin.
There's a scene at the beginning of the film that makes it clear that everything about it is going to be very distinctive looking. It's a scene where you walk through snow very deliberately to the, it's a dream. You know that better than I do, but to the scene of a car accident,
yeah.
And it's the walking is almost like a kind of sleepwalking. Were things like that? Did he tell you exactly how he wanted that? Or?
No, he didn't actually. Funnily enough, I've actually questioned whether I should have made that choice, and whether it should have been so almost balletic. You know,
It's very eerie. It really works, but
well, you know, maybe it does, and I trust Tom's judgment, and he wanted to use it, and he used it. And
had you ever done anything like that before?
Well, I've done lots of things that are not like anything, and I think this is not really. I mean, I have been involved in dream sequences in which your movement is required to be different and to change. I think it has to be unearthly. I think it has to not seem like a part of daily life. I mean, I think if you're acting out dreams, you have to find a convention for that. And I think that this is an area where I just had to trust him. He was the man behind the camera. He was the man who was going to be in the cutting room. He was the man who was going to choose the music, and he was the man who was going to ultimately decide the pace of the film. And so Tom had a way of directing you by either accepting or rejecting what you gave him. If he intervened verbally, it was to provide a nugget. It was never to tussle with you or to upset the process or to try to provoke anything.
Did you have any input along the lines of, I think I should be wearing glasses in this film? You did?
Well, glasses is actually the one. I said, I think I should be wearing glasses.
Really?
Yes.
I just guessed that.
That wasn't, yeah, well, we did not plan that. Yes, that was one. And funnily enough, given that Tom is famous for eyewear, I had some concern when the film came out that it would be yet another thing that would be attributed to Tom's idea of style. And believe me, it wasn't. That was one of the few things Tom resisted a little bit.
Why did you want that?
Well, I didn't think I want to wear glasses throughout the movie. Basically, there were options. I walked into a room, and he were ties and shoes, and he was the suit, and I don't remember there being much choice about what the suit would be. But I remember there being certain accessories, and there was the props guys just brought out a tray with some glasses and said, you know, do you feel like you might wear glasses when you read or something? And I looked through them, and I've resisted them quite a lot. A lot of directors, director of photography doesn't like them usually because of reflections, and then there are directors who think no, it creates a barrier, and then there'll be people who say no, it's a kind of it's a crutch, it's an acting crutch, it's something to try to artificially enhance what you're doing, or whatever. But I just happened to find these, and they just kind of I picked them up, and it's almost like they vibrated. I just thought, and I tried them on, and thought I really, they just instinctively go with my perception of this guy, and I want to wear them. At the time, it was just maybe I'd have a couple of scenes where I'd put them on for reading. And then those couple of scenes, that was allowed, and those couple of scenes became another scene and another one. And then just Tom gradually, I mean, when I say gradually, we shot this movie in 21 days, so nothing was really gradual, but probably after lunch of the first day or something. Tom saw me in them and said, I think wear them in this scene if you want. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, I think you like them, so wear them. And that was the way he did things. It was, if you want, if you like, if that makes you feel. And so you always felt you were in control. I look back, and I know he was totally in control all the time.
There has been some talk about the way the movie has been marketed, with showing scenes of you with her. And some people have said, not me, of course, but some people have said that gives a misleading impression that this is actually about a heterosexual relationship, when really it's about a man who's lost the man he loved.
Well,
Want to answer that?
I don't know. It's difficult for me to comment on the marketing thing. Yeah, possibly.
But you know, there's been a
maybe there's still a fear out there that the idea that it's about a gay man makes it a kind of niche thing. That will, that'll stop it reaching certain markets and certain areas of, Middle England, Middle America, Middle anywhere. I don't know. And maybe they're right, but I don't want it to be that. I mean, there were no compromises in Christopher Isherwood. There were no compromises in the way Tom wrote it or directed it. There were no compromises in anything we did. And I would hate to think there were any compromises in the way it was marketed. There was a bit of a fuss about the trailer because it features a kiss between myself and Matthew Good, and there was a version I think that came out that took the kiss out, and there were various members of the press who questioned that, and I was asked about it. And then looking back on that, yeah, I would hate to think that. Again, there's nothing to sanitize here. But on the other hand, that's the only kiss between men in the movie, and it's not a trailer is supposed to give you a taster for the film, and that doesn't do that, and it probably misrepresents it a little bit as being heavily to do with sexual contact, of which there is absolutely none. So, these are gray areas, I think, which can get picked over and argued over and all the rest of it. But yeah.
Beyond the fact that he is a gay man, he's lost the man that he's been with for 16 years. He meets a couple of other men during the course of the film. Do you see this as a particularly gay or universal, or what kind of love story do you see it as?
Certainly not particularly gay. I don't really think that. I mean, it doesn't ignore the fact, and it certainly applies.
It makes him more secretive, or have to be more secretive.
Yeah, it does. It makes it, but people are secretive about their sexuality in one way or another generally anyway, unless they're Italian. Sorry, that's a dig at my wife. No, it's, I think people, not everybody flaunts their sexuality, but I take your point. I think that certainly in 1962, he's a college professor. It might have made people more suspicious of him. I certainly in the 70s, when I was a teenage schoolboy, the idea that anybody might be gay also implied that they might also be some kind of predator. That those are the kind of prejudices, and I think we live with those less now in our society.
One of the few things that's distinctly, I think, gay in the writing is that there's a young student who gets a crush on, or becomes interested in being helpful and getting to know your character better. And a woman might be just as aggressive, but would probably do it in a different way. Wouldn't say, I want to help you, come out for a drink with me, have you ever taken drugs, things.
Possibly, but a young male student might do it with an older female professor.
Yeah.
So, you can juggle this around. I still think you could find a very, very similar story without it being a gay theme. I think it might add somewhat to George's isolation, but I don't think it's dependent on it. And, I think one of the most interesting and progressive aspects to Christopher Isherwood's writing was the fact that he put no emphasis whatsoever on the sexuality of his characters, and yet he wrote about their sexuality. But their sexual orientation was not an issue at all. It was just by the by. I mean, these were people who happened to be gay, or not.
Why are the heterosexuals in the movie so gaslit, which they are?
Are they? No, hang on, let me do a little audit of the heterosexual. You mean the Lee Pace's character?
The people next door.
I don't think that's to do with them being heterosexual. I think that's to do with them being suburban.
Okay.
I think that's true. That's Christopher Isherwood as well, because he created that family in the book.
But he's living right next door.
I know, but he has to live amongst them, and I think basically that's Isherwood, and with a lot of help from Tom Ford, sticking it to the suburbs. And he subverts himself all the time, though. I mean, the Strunks are a pretty ghastly family, and I have to say, the Strunks. They're called the Strunks. This was Isherwood's name for the neighbours and the snotty kids, and the dad who does think that George is lighting the loafers and should be put in the Colosseum and all the rest of it. It's interesting about, we can consider ourselves progressive and enlightened when it comes to, the great march of liberation for marginalized groups of people. But, the scene in which I shot the phone call in which I get the news that Jim is dead, and that I also cannot come to the funeral because it's family only, happened to be also the day on which Prop 8 was passed in California. And suddenly you don't feel quite so lofty about, how far we've come. And we can't patronize the past, and we're actually it was just very resonant to me that we shot a scene like that in a moment when such a horrendously retrograde piece of legislation was passed. And on the way to work that day, because we were shooting mostly at night, in the afternoon, I was driven through those suburbs of Glendale or wherever it was, and there were families out in force, nice, waspy, perfect nuclear families that looked like, kind of, Horlicks commercials from the 1950s, and they, with ads up, placards up promoting Prop 8, smile and honk your horn for discrimination, and. So I don't think the film takes up a militant stance. I don't think it. In fact, I think it does the opposite. I think it does what Isherwood would have intended, which is it just makes it unassuming. It creates a world in which actually your sexuality belongs in the mainstream along with everyone else's. Even though I know what the background is, even though I know that George, he does the lecture on fear, I know it refers to that, but I don't think it's dependent on it.
You've said that Paul Scofield is one of your favorite actors. The chance to hold forth and really give a speech like that, did you?
No, that's not what I loved about Paul Scofield. It wasn't his King Lear or his Othello.
There's a voice similarity a little bit, I think.
Well, bless you for that. I mean, I'll take it. No, it was. I know I've been credited on this. I've said it over and over again. Man for All Seasons. It was how little he did. It wasn't his oratory and his, the grandeur of his style. It was actually the fact that it was the first time I was about 12, 13, 14 years old. It was the first time I developed a new concept of what acting was, which was the idea that you can do everything without doing anything. And it was a paradox which gripped me at that age. And it's a paradox which exists in acting, and if you can probably expand that to just about every art form, because it's all artifice which seeks to create truth.
Did you know at that age that you wanted to be an actor?
That's when I wanted to become an actor, probably. To look at somebody and think that I'm getting truth here. This is exuding truth. I'm feeling the quality of truthfulness, whatever that is, and it's a very nebulous commodity. But it's giving me at least a hankering for it, and to look at a face which it just conveyed truthfulness, and yet I knew this was a man who was engaged in an exercise which was by its very job description and nature artificial. He was acting, he was pretending. He wasn't really Thomas More. He didn't really live in the 16th century. He wasn't about to get his head cut off. He was just another thespian like me. I was going to be. It just was, showing up in front of a camera. So that gripped me. Until then, I had always admired demonstrative acting and the clever stuff. But here, I just saw something coming out of a guy's eyes. So little movement, and I thought, where does that come from?
Just this is an odd little thing, but there's a young blonde student, a girl, sitting there, and there are a couple of other women in the movie also, who number one sort of remind us of movie stars of that period. She looks like a young Bardot, and your character looks them in the eye and is somehow very struck by their heavily made up eyes. And I wondered what that was about.
Well, Tom had a thing about eyes because I think it was to do with making... it was to do with connectivity. He has one day to live. This is what he's decided. And there's a line that George has to Kenny at the end where he said the only thing that's made it all worthwhile have been the few moments when I've actually connected with another human being. And, obviously it's, in the language of cinema, it's going to be about eyes, even though Tom tries to bring all the other senses in, and he does it beautifully, I think. But
they
it's
just
eyes.
seem very stylized, the women's.
Well, it might seem stylized, but I don't think the intention was to do with style. I think it was to do with, her eyes, she was, basically the model, as I understood it for her, was not Bud, it was Nico. Ah. And that, certainly, she has nothing if not a certain froideur, and, Kenny is the one who's reaching out and saying, I want to save you. All these eyes are basically, I think, calling George back to life again, having decided he's going to give up on it. These are eyes which are saying, I'm reaching out, I would save you if I could. Whether it's the hustler outside the liquor store or the owner of the little dog that he meets. Mm-hmm. Her eyes are saying nothing. Mm-hmm. Her eyes are the cold eyes of, indifference. I don't care what happens to you.
And blowing smoke.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
the blowing of smoke. And that lecture hall is full of people who do not care one way or the other what George is talking about.
Isn't it sort of paradoxical that you played a guy who was close to the end of his life and deciding about that while getting into absolute perfect physical condition for the role?
Well, no, well, all right, yes, it is. And bless you for saying perfect physical condition. There's a lot to do with lighting and... basically, I think that George tries to achieve perfection out of desperation. He puts on his cufflinks and his tie pin as if his life depended on them. I got the sense that this is a man, if you take away his tie pin, he will fall apart. It takes time in the morning to become George. You know, I put together the slightly stiff but perfectly, but utterly perfect George. That's body armor. That is not decoration. That is not vanity. That is a weapon against a terror of complete chaos, which I think is raging inside him. He is grief-stricken to an almost hysterical degree. He's woken up in the morning. Among the first things you hear him say in the interior monologue is that it hurts to wake up. He does not like being in the present moment. Waking up begins with the words am and now. That's the way the novel starts. And inhabiting the present is intolerable. And that is why he has decided to kill himself. And in his world and in his perception, that is a perfectly rational decision to make. And what I think is magical about this story is that everything that happens to him is a challenge to that decision. The decision to give up on life, that he has passed judgment on life as not being worth living. And everything that happens challenges that.
Except for the people next door.
Well, except he meets the little girl from next door, who suddenly has gone from being the brat next door to the most beautiful child he's ever seen. And I think that one of the most poignant things about the story is that the things he sees, which are all like visions of beatitude or kind of, you know, holy revelations, are all completely and utterly mundane, everyday things. The sunset, which looks like a vision of paradise, is just smog. The most beautiful face he's ever seen in his life is the hustler outside the liquor store. I know he happened to cast the most beautiful.
That guy's a supermodel.
I know. But he's heightening things because this is George's perception. I mean, let's say we're seeing things through George's eyes. Let's say we had the opportunity to go back and look at the actual things George saw that day. And if we were there, we might go, no, the sunset wasn't really that red. And the sunset was smog. But I mean, it's pollution. But if we went back there, that wouldn't be. The hustler outside the liquor store probably wouldn't have been played by John Cortajarena, who is a supermodel. He would just look like any other hustler outside a liquor store.
I only know he's a supermodel because I looked up his credits and he was in a film called...
But basically I think that Tom is heightening things, not because he's a fashion designer trying to give us, just flaunting his skills. I think that he is sincerely trying to say this is a day in which the senses are sharpened, in which everything you see is, because you're seeing them for the last time, that actually today it's as if you're seeing them for the first time.
Do you know the Iranian film Taste of Cherry?
I haven't seen it.
Because it's
similar?
Yeah, well, very different style, but...
the concept is...
It's also someone who wants to...
Well, I mean, listen, Dennis Potter gave the most... really, almost painfully poignant series of interviews as he was dying. Dennis Potter, the great English writer. As he was dying of cancer, he basically decided to discuss his illness and the process of dying publicly. And he talked about flowers. I mean, there's a moment where George sees a rose, and again, he knows in his mind that's the last rose he'll ever see. So it's more than just a rose. It's a spiritual experience. And talk about being in the present. This is a man who despises the present, who suddenly finds he's inhabiting the present because the present is upon him, because it's all over within a few hours. And Potter talks about looking outside the window beyond the desk where he would write and seeing the blossoms. And I don't know how long he lived in that house, and he'd seen the blossoms. I mean, this is distant memory, so I can only paraphrase what he said. But he looked out at these flowers that he'd seen year after year after year, and he'd always liked them. But this time he knew he would never see them again, and he wasn't quite sure how long he had, but there was no way he was going to make it to another spring. And he said, so that today they became the brightest, most beautiful, most vibrant, whitest, blossomest blossoms that I'd ever seen. And I'd never forgotten that. I mean, that came 15 years, I think, before we shot this film. But when I read the script, some of that came back to me. That whether it was about the way a woman wears her hair, or the perfume that she's wearing, or the way a dog's ears smell, or the way that just a young boy's face looks, and he's not trying to have sex with this guy, or the way a child looks on this particular day, a child he's seen every day of his life, who today is an angel because he'll never see a child again, or whether it's the owl in the back garden, or breathing the night air, which is just in his own backyard, but tonight it's the night air that is basically feeling like the world just came into being, and it has all this freshness. These are all things that conspire to make him want to live. You know, so people ask me, is the film depressing? You know, it's about a man who wants to die. I think that, you know, we should all be so lucky to have a day like that.
When people mention the film, I find they number one, they talk about your performance, and number two, they all talk about the same scene, which is the scene with the telephone. How did you do that?
I don't know. I mean, you know, I acted the script. I mean, Tom pointed a camera at the chair and switched it on, and there we were.
You only had 21 days. Did you do that over and over, or is that an early take? Or?
That was the day I was talking about where Prop 8 passed, yeah. And it was also the day that Barack Obama won the election in this country, and there was general euphoria, and I shared in that, and so I was feeling pretty happy, actually. In fact, just as we were about to go for a take, the sound guy took off his cans and played McCain's concession speech, and so there we were, kind of, you know, we didn't know each other very well. That was about the 4th day of the shoot, or the 5th day, I think, and we were just, you know, beside ourselves with relief. And Tom, basically, I think the magic that he has as a director is that he allows space for things to happen, even though there is no time. Something I touched on earlier, the illusion of freedom when there really isn't any, the illusion of time when actually we don't have any. There was never any haste, and frankly, he just allowed me to inhabit the moment. The script doesn't say George hangs up the phone and then we stay on him for a while.
None of that's on the page, really.
Not at all. It was just the dialogue, and then it cuts to, I think, my running to Charlie's house.
Were you talking to somebody, or did you not even have
I was
a
talking
voice?
to Chris Weitz, the producer.
Ah.
He was on the other end of the phone. He did a great job. It's a different actor, subsequently. And I'll tell you what happened. I mean, it was a very unusual experience in that I acted the scene. Let me just go. It's one of the most difficult things I find as an actor. I think all actors find, and we actually had drama school exercises based on facing this challenge, is to start a scene in one emotional state and end it in another one. You know, if you have a scene of emotional devastation, we all prefer as actors to prepare the emotional devastation before the camera rolls, you know, and you can sit there for a while and get quiet and use music or whatever it is you use, and you know, and then say, I've got my emotional devastation prepared. Roll camera quickly before it goes away. And that's what we like to do. One of the things is, when you read a script, that actually where your heart sinks. One is a naked man on bed, which is how this script opened. And the other is, you know, George picks up the phone, perfectly happy, chat. Bad news, terrible news. You've got to end the scene, and however you end the scene. And the script did not tell you how he wanted the emotional trajectory to go. So I just didn't know. I thought there wouldn't be any tears here. I thought you just hear the news, you kind of numb, and then we cut to a scene later of devastation. So I didn't have any plans for it, and I don't think Tom did. He just thought he'd see what happened. But for the sake of seeing what happened, he did something which I think was inspirational, which is he just no notes, no verbal instructions, just go, action, play scene, put phone down, and I just noticed he wasn't saying cut. And we just went on and on and on, and I just sat in that chair. I don't quite know how long it takes for a magazine or film to roll out. I think it felt like 10 minutes, I think. Somebody said it was 11 minutes, I'm not sure. And no one said cut. The magazine just went and rolled out. And so I knew we were done. They weren't in the room. The only people in the room were the camera operator and the sound guy with the boom mic. The others were in another room watching a monitor. And I thought, well, the magazine's rolled out. How are we doing? And I went into the next room, and they were all emotional.
I would think everybody must have been crying.
And then Tom didn't really say anything. He just said, well, let's do that again. They put another magazine of film in. We did all of it again. So the tricky thing really was just having to go back to Happy to start the scene. So it was like picking up the phone. Oh, I've been waiting for your call all day. It's been raining. Oh, how you been saying? And then just go through the journey again. And then he let the magazine roll out again, and then he did it again, and he put another magazine on. So we had 3 of those, and then he did a shot from the sun. We were done, but it was pretty simple. I mean, I think one of the things, it is edited. I mean, it looks like just one long sequence. It's not. It's very much Tom's work. He sculpted and crafted the moments. He had a lot of material. I mean, I pity the people watching the DVD featurette, you know. You might get all the alternative bits of emotional masturbation that you don't get in life. But no, I mean, he couldn't last forever, and he picked his moments, and he worked with a brilliant editor. And there's something almost musical about the way Tom shaped things, about the judgment that he used for the emotional hills and valleys of it, if you like.
So because of the way he did it, and because of the way you did that scene, and because of the way you did the whole thing, you now find yourself kind of down the rabbit hole and going from talk show to talk show, from awards thing to awards thing. This is not the only red carpet you're going to be on anytime soon. Are you enjoying that? What's it like? You are? You are good.
I'm loving it.
That's wonderful. Nobody ever says that.
They don't say they're loving it?
No, they say it's just anguish.
Yeah, weird, isn't it? I mean, it's like, what is that quote about those whom the gods wish to punish? You know, they fulfill their dreams or whatever. No, I'm okay. I'm doing fine, thank you. I mean, bring it on, really. There's something about this happening at my age. I haven't had a lot of this, So in terms of awards recognition, and my shelf is full of awards that are pretty hard to explain.
You mentioned something about a fishing trophy.
Yeah, I do. That's true. No, the Ostend Fisherman's Choice. It's the fishing village in Belgium. And I don't want to belittle it. I'm very proud. I'm glad I'm big with Belgian fishermen, and it's fine. Liechtenstein's People's Choice Gay Films of Gay Interest Award or something like that.
You won the I think in Venice, the Queer Lion.
I did. I've got it.
What does that look like?
I don't know what it looks like. I haven't laid my hands on it yet. But who doesn't want a queer lion? No, I mean I'm very proud of all these things, and. There's definitely some stress that accompanies this stuff. The Venice moment was wonderful. That was the Venice Film Festival. That was wonderful in a completely uncomplicated way. It had everything going for it. The film had never been seen publicly, and it was shown for the first time in front of an audience, and they just loved it. And we walked in, and the press conference, people don't clap at press conferences, they usually snarl. I mean, you walk in, and you're looking at a wall of, at best, inscrutability, if not utter hostility. And this was applause, and people, some of them were on their feet, and not everybody agreed how much they liked the film, but there was a general consensus that they liked it, and some people adored it. And we were all there together, and then the screening at Venice was, I think, a moment to be cherished for life, really, because, as I said, this was a short shoot. There were very few of us making it. I was on my own as an actor on the set most of the time. I mean, the other actors, when they showed up, were a kind of vacation from my job because they made it so easy. They were so brilliant. There's nothing like having brilliant actors to just, you know, give you your job for nothing. When Julianne showed up, I didn't have to do anything anymore. She was just so good, all I had to do was react. And it's the same with Nick Holt and Matthew Good, and even John Cortajarena, who plays the beautiful model outside the liquor store we're talking about. He'd never acted in his life. He was absolutely terrified, but I found him so good and so relaxed as an actor, I didn't feel I had to do a damn thing. So I had all that for nothing, but they weren't around that much. And so there were a lot of lonely days on the set where I was sort of going around craft service, wondering if I could allow myself an M&M. And still be able to close my Tom Ford jacket.
I was going to ask you about the Hershey bar in the movie, by the way. It's like on the desk on your
Spat
office
it out. No, I didn't eat it.
But it's the only sign of any kind of disarray in the entire movie.
That's interesting. Yeah, one of George's little sort of
And you only see it
appetite.
once. It's not. There's a cut, and then it's not there anymore.
His whiskey bottle, you could attribute that to something of the fact that it's empty. He didn't, you know, his 3 last aspirin, you know. I think they're little signs of how he sustains himself.
Well, anyway, so there you were at the Golden Globes.
Oh, yes. It's not a clear memory, I have to say, partly because they didn't feed us. So you know, if your dinner consists entirely of champagne, it's a wonderful anesthetic. I mean, I have to say, you know, if you have any expectations for awards, and at 50, you know, if there's something wrong with you if they're not under careful management by that age. One is, you know, recognition of how worthy your opponent is, and the other is alcohol. And and also, quite frankly, you know, I woke up at the red carpet and I walked into the room and I looked at where everyone was seated. It didn't look favorable. I mean,
Jeff Bridges was kind of right next to the podium.
Yeah, Bridges was next to the microphone that he was about to. And I was rammed up against the wall. You know, you can't get much further back. There was a table and there was a wall. I wasn't just at the last table. You know who pointed this out? It was Clooney at the end of the evening. Clooney, I ran into Clooney at the end, and he said, "Man, I thought you were going to win till I saw where you were seated." And where the table was, I was at the back of the last table. Not at the front of the last table with a little bit of access. It was as if they couldn't have squeezed me further. It was like, you're not even going to the men's room. You know, if I'd even had an olive, I would not have been able to fit. And so what we had to do, actually, it wasn't me that even asked this. Somebody around that table very generously said, "We need to move the table." And I said, "Well, you don't do that at the Golden Globes. I mean, there are cameras everywhere. You don't get a bunch of A-list people lifting up a table to move." But they did. And you know what? Had there been a camera on us, you would have seen us all standing up. You would have seen me, Sophia Loren, Kate Hudson, Tom Ford, Julianne Moore, Fergie, and Livia, all going 1, 2, 3, whoa! Just so that I could breathe. So if there's anything to keep your hopes under management, you know.
Thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you.